So good afternoon, 3:06 in the middle of America, 4:06 on the East Coast, where our special guest Irma Esparza Diggs is coming from the National League of Cities. And so I'm Eric Sartorius, League of Kansas Municipalities Executive Director. I'm about 2 weeks shy of being here 7 years with all of y'all, and that is very difficult to believe. So Megan, if you can just jump 2 slides, please. All right, so here we go. So we are going to be monitoring the chat for questions. I will tell you in advance as I tell, and then apparently nobody listens to me. We won't be able to tell you if you can use funds to replace street signs today, or if something that is water related but not a water project can be used for funds. Okay, you can ask them, we'll probably skip them. I can't give you any answers with certainty, neither can Irma. She can and leave me holding the bag, but she's so much nicer than that, so she won't do that. We are expecting guidance from Treasury before May 10th, which may mean it may be the Mother's Day present. But we were hoping there would be guidance, but it is not out yet. So what they're trying to do this time is okay, so we'll slide back. I'm going to ignore questions for a while, or I'm really going to get thrown off. And I think Irma may be able to give you some guidance as to the likelihood of, sending your fact-specific question to Treasury and them ever seeing it or answering it. But I may be wrong. So on to slide 4, please. Next slide, please. And so the American Rescue Plan Act was signed in March, and through several different formulas, this funding is coming to us. And I would say there is nobody you can thank more, put on your Christmas card list more than Irma and her team in terms of how much they pushed for this, how long they fought for this. Almost the entire pandemic, they've been working to get funding secured specifically to cities that didn't go through anybody else, and it's coming. So you can see almost 1.6 billion coming to the state of Kansas, cities 424 million, counties 565 million. Within cities, there are two pockets, 2 groups of cities. One is for cities over 50,000 in population, and that is 9 cities in Kansas, and they will get their money, and counties will get their money directly from the Treasury Department. Everyone else is going to get their money via the state. And so the state is expecting to receive monies around May 10th, and then they have 30 days to distribute, but I know that they are looking to get that sent out much sooner than that. And so this comes on top of the 1.4 billion that was trillion that was part of the CARES Act, and then the 900 billion that was part of the package passed in December. Okay, Megan, next slide, please. And so what you see, as I just described, Treasury will be getting funds out around May 10th. Those will get to the state. The state will then have 30 days to distribute those. They can ask for extensions, but we've been in close contact with the Department of Administration, and they are working very hard to have a very solid list of cities to be able to turn this money around to you just as soon as possible. And so if you get an email from the Department of Administration or the Office of Recovery, and they are asking you about ACH deposits and such, if you have any questions, please contact the League. I don't want you to be phished or scammed, but they are looking to get everything set up so that as soon as they get the money, they can turn it right over to you. And the important piece about the money to remember is that 1/2 of it will be distributed now. And so early to mid-June is probably where you want to think about receiving it. And the other half will come 1 year from then. So your total allocation amount that you may see either on NLC's website or we've linked to theirs, that is still an approximation. The finals have not yet flowed through, since we're still missing some cities. And then just be cognizant that half of it's coming now, half of it in a year. You do not have to spend your first half of money before you receive your second half. It's not conditioned upon that. And all of those funds, and this is, if you've heard me on our weekly calls preaching, you have until the end of December 2024 to spend these. There is no hurry to get these spent. And as we discussed more, you'll see some of the reasons for why we may want to sit tight. So on to the next one, please, Megan. So this is just a little comparison for you for Kansas. On the left is what was received as, well, to the left and the right. The dark blue is what was received directly under CARES funding, and then the medium blue is what we will be seeing coming via ARPA. And as you can see, both for, and they call cities under 50,000 non-entitlement cities, and it comes from, they're kind of using the framework of the Community Development Block Grant funding mechanism. So cities under 50,000 are non-entitlement. So they've split that out a little bit. As you can see, there's a vast difference in the money being received this time directly by cities versus the CARES Act. Back in the CARES Act, states were not required to share any money. The state did share, though they sent it through the counties, which I know was quite the challenge for many of our cities, as you made excellent cases about legitimate costs, and so in several instances those went unheard, and in some cases they were committed to funding, and then when the funding came to the county pulled the rug out from under a couple of y'all. That's neither here nor there. The sun is shining with ARPA. So next stuff, please. Irma will go into these in a little bit more detail, but early on, want you to be aware, there is a lot of money coming to the state, well beyond what's coming to cities, counties, and the state. Over 4.9 billion in funds are coming to Kansas. And as you can see in here, this is just a kind of the hodgepodge of where those funds are coming. Some are going to be filling up programs that already exist. Some is going to be part of new programming. And these are the items that we want you to be considering and thinking about. And I know Irma's going to go over a lot of this as you begin considering what your funds would go for and why you might need them. And on to the next one, please. Okay, and as you see, these are links. We'll make these slides available. These are links to several of our resources that can be used. National League of Cities just has, I keep finding more and more things from you all, Irma. It's just been very gratifying to be able to go in and find some really good information and some things. Two pieces that I would mention. You know, the one at the top, I know that's of great interest to everybody. What's our estimated money? What are we going to get? And as I said, these aren't finalized amounts. And Irma can correct me if she's heard differently, but I would say these are going to be in the near ballpark. So if it says you're getting 100,000, it would be stunning if when the finalized list came, you suddenly were only getting 10,000. It's going to be kind of rounding numbers versus some giant, oh my gosh, I hit an unexpected jackpot, or I completely did not get what we were expecting. It should be pretty close. So they have several things there. One nice document that's there is Irma and her staff have compiled all of the programs contained within ARPA that are not direct funding to cities, but have shown places where it's a grant that cities can access, or competitive funds that they can seek. And so there's that opportunity to really layer and leverage what you're receiving. All right, please ahead, Megan. Thank you. Okay, and now you're getting to why you all came. Irma Esparza Diggs has been with NLC coming up on 4 years, I believe, right in there, right? And comes from a long line of experience on Capitol Hill, working with legislators, actually executive director of the House Democratic Caucus previously, and lots of work in previous administrations, and has just worked, as I can't say it enough, tirelessly on behalf of cities to get us where we are, not just on funding, but on so many other items that have come our way pre-pandemic. Pre-pandemic, she was plenty busy, and past year, you can't even imagine how much time and resources she, her team, and NLC have dedicated to working for cities. And so with no further pause, Irma, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate gathering and the opportunity to actually talk to you all who have been not only on the front lines, but frankly, the ones who have been assumed the responsibility of meeting the public health and safety and welfare needs of your residents, your businesses, and all of those in your community who have looked to you for leadership during what has definitely been a difficult year. It's already going to be May 2021, but we fought hard for funding, and we were able to get it included. Overall, the estimated shortfall was $90 billion that we estimated for municipalities across the country. And so what we ended up with is 65.1 billion. And in and of itself, we truly believe it's going to be enough to meet the needs of municipalities between the local relief fund that provides the most flexibility, and all of the other funding that's coming directly or indirectly. And Megan, do me a favor, do you have my slides or do you need me to pull those up? I thought they were embedded, but if not, yeah. I can do that while thank you so much. If you could just advance forward. So I think the most important, and Eric, thank you. I appreciate you reminding everybody, we are still waiting on guidance. And the reason that's important is because the guidance from the Department of Treasury as it relates to the local relief fund, so that has the greatest flexibility, that really is going to tell us all that we need to know about allowable uses of this funding. Because this is the first time that the federal government has set up a program that would mean direct appropriations for cities, regardless of population size. As you can imagine, it is a steep uphill climb, not just for the federal government to get this new federal program up and running, but also for us as an association to be able to really, and for you all to be able to prepare for this. There are a lot of communities that have never received federal grants before. And so this actually is going to be transformative for a lot of municipal governments. And it's exciting and very much needed. So I will tell you, the reason we were able to make such a strong case for direct funding is because so many municipal governments, in particular mid-size and small communities, never really saw what they needed to from the CARES Act funding, and states were all dramatically different in terms of how they shared emergency relief through the CARES Act, which was at a critical period at the height of the pandemic. And so in absence of federal support, many communities had to make tough decisions and lay off a sizable portion of their workforce, and also cut critical services. So what this means is that you don't have, even though your money will flow, if you're a population 50,000 and above, will flow through the state, it's just a sub allocation. So you do not have to worry about state interference in how you expend those dollars. Everything you need to know will come from Treasury. Now, because the money will be sub allocated through the state, there will be some administrative aspects of getting those dollars, but all of you who receive this funding will be required to submit a report to Treasury. And that's one of the things that we'll work to see, is whether or not you submit that via the state or submit it directly to Treasury. So moving forward, Megan, on the next slide, and I have a bunch of slides, but what I want to do is be able to just drive home some key points about the funding. And and so we've talked about the amount of money that's coming through the local fiscal recovery funds. If I remember correctly, I think it's section M in the legislation. There is also funding coming that's $10 billion that'll go through the state for a capital project fund, and the use of those funds are broadband. And so moving forward, if you could move the next slide, there are allowable uses, and I'll talk about the allowable uses in a minute, but I do want to convey that even if what you receive you feel like might not be enough to offset loss of revenues or unbudgeted expenditures, you have some flexibility to meet some infrastructure needs. But I do want to say to all of you all, and I've noticed that my questions that I'm getting or that are being asked are beginning to push the envelope in the sense that the uses of the funding are not tied to what has happened with the pandemic. And so just know that the Department of Treasury is very closely going to follow the intention of the law, and guidance will be aligned with such, which is why I don't think that funding for sidewalks and road repair will be an allowable use of this. They're going to be very limited to what the legislation is. Also what was included in this legislation, and this is particularly important for smaller communities, below 50,000, there is a cap of 75% of what you can receive, but that's based on your pre-pandemic budget. So in other words, if you have $100 coming to you, if your budget is you're only going to be able to receive 75% of what your most recent pre-pandemic budget is. And the reason that that was included in there is because things vary state to state, and there was concern that essentially a small locality could receive an amount up to twice the size of their operational budget, and they wouldn't have the infrastructure nor capacity to spend that amount of money. So that was a way to create an amount that is feasible for localities, regardless of infrastructure, to be able to spend. Also, you can use these funds through December 2024 through the end, so December 31st, and any unexpended funds have to be returned to Treasury. As Eric said, but I think this is important for you to factor in as you're thinking about how to use these funds. These grants will be released in 2 tranches or in 2 disbursements. So you'll get 50% of the amount that is entitled to come to you, as soon as the state suballocates it. And then 12 months following, you'll get your second 50% disbursement. So if I were you, or if I were city and I had a significant revenue loss, I would focus on stabilizing your government operations and utilize that first disbursement to stabilize your operations and replenish the losses that you suffered or unbudgeted expenditures. And the second half, think more strategically, especially once I go through this, you'll see what I mean about how you utilize those funds that give you the most flexibility. So do me a favor, Megan, if you can move it forward. And I know I'm being a little long-winded, and I want to make sure we have, I want to make sure I leave time for questions. These are a couple of what you're allowed to do with the funding. So you can transfer funds to a private nonprofit organization. You can transfer it to a public benefit corporation that is involved in the transportation of passengers. So your metro, your bus line. You can also, the state government can transfer funding to you. You can transfer it to other local governments. That is to provide flexibility for local governments that are very much partners with other government stakeholders and NGO stakeholders to be able to leverage funding and really come up with smart plan on how it's used. I talked about the 75%. The other thing you should know is that these funds cannot be used for to backfill unfunded pension liabilities. That the legislation was very clear about that. And then also, if you are a metropolitan city, 50,000 and above, you will need a DUNS number, DUNS, and an active SAM registration number, SAM, and those are financial accounting numbers so that your funds can be routed to you. On our website, we do have information on, and actually the Department of Treasury has on their website on how you can request a DUNS and a SAMS number. So those are two of the things you want to go ahead and do now. For non-entitlement communities below 50,000, all you need is a DUNS number. So next slide, please. So these are the allowable uses, and I want to focus on these for a minute, but I don't want to spend a whole lot of time because Treasury guidance will really answer a lot of your questions related to this. So think about it this way. The reason this money is coming to you is to be able to help you stabilize your government operations, but also the needs of your community with respect to the pandemic. So in other words, if you have an expenditure that you want to make, but it is not something that is tied to the pandemic or a consequence of the pandemic, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be an allowable use. But you have some great flexibility, nevertheless, in here that Congress and the administration has provided. And the first is that you can use this fund to respond to the public health emergency that existed within your community, or its negative economic impacts. So in other words, you can use these funds to meet the needs that have arisen as a result of the pandemic. You can provide grants to households, you can provide grants to small businesses, nonprofits, tourism entities, travel entities. This is not going to be restrictive, as restrictive as the CARES Act. And I think that's key. I think I saw a question, and I'll go through and answer the questions, but I saw something about public safety vehicles and whether or not you can use this funding. I truly believe that if you purchase new vehicles in order to help you respond to the pandemic, the increased calls and emergency calls, that would be an allowable use. Second, this allows you to help support the workers who did essential work and provide premium pay, so overtime, to eligible workers of a city, a municipal government. And actually, the law allows for you to provide up to $13 per hour above the regular wages. So it gives you some considerable room to really reward those essential workers that work tirelessly during the pandemic. You can use this funding to be able to offset your loss of revenues or any reduction in revenue that you as a city government saw as a result of the public health emergency. So property taxes that didn't come in, utility fees that didn't get collected, sales taxes, any source of revenue that declined as a result of the pandemic is what you can utilize this money to offset. So this completely allows for revenue replacement. And what we are asking Treasury to be very clear on what they define as sources of revenue, or to be as expansive, because I know there's enterprise funds and all kinds of funds that don't necessarily make up the general operating budget, but do go to help the city meet overall expenditures that are required for that city to make. So one of the things we've asked is please define revenues, or what can be used as revenues. But also we've asked them to clearly define, because each city has, or not each city, but cities have different fiscal years in which they operate. So let the city say, this was the last prior full fiscal year before the pandemic, and this is the year that we are going to use as the baseline to justify or to account for loss of revenue for this given year that we're in, for example. And then the last eligible expenditure, and this is key, and this was added in because frankly, there were many communities who didn't see the loss that some other municipalities did. And so you can use this fund to make investments in water, sewer, or broadband. Now that or is key. It doesn't say and. And so one of the questions we have asked is, okay, so can they spend this on water and broadband? Is that allowable, or is it just one of the things? Does water mean clean water, or does it mean wastewater management system? So asking for those kinds of specifics is what we've been really working hard to do with Treasury. And we've been not only sending them routine written communication on the questions that we need them to ask, but also recommendations for interpretations of guidance and the legislation with respect to what we hear are the concerns for cities. Next slide. And Eric, tell me how long. I think I can probably go. I know I can go a lot longer, but I think I'll probably go through like another 10 minutes and then leave 20 minutes of questions. Is that okay?
That is great, Irma. And if you need a little bit more, go ahead. I'm working with my fingers in the background here,
Okay.
knocking out questions I'm sure about, and
Right.
then leaving the tough ones for you.
Right, no problem. So I feel like I'm giddy talking about this stuff. This means I do nothing but this, and there is something wrong with that. But here, what you see before you are principles for the fund. And basically what we wanted to do is convey to city leaders, in absence of official guidance and very specific use of the local relief fund, what is it that you could be doing right now to prepare? And so these 5 things are key. And the first one is really using dedicated grants and programs first whenever possible. So I know I have a slide that enumerates the buckets of funding for schools, for vaccines, for rental emergency assistance. Those programs all have dedicated uses, meaning you can only use it on rental assistance. You can only use it on childcare. So we did provide a comprehensive summary of the American Rescue Plan Act. In total, it's about $1.9 trillion. The local budget is just 60, or state and local governments is 130 billion. So there's still so much money that is going to be coming into your community, either to households, to businesses. And so you want to know how to leverage those, because I know that you have been providing a stopgap or meeting needs in absence of those types of federal relief programs. And so think strategically and make sure you know what other pots of funding are coming in there to your transit systems, to your schools, and then use your local relief funds to supplement what's still needed. Again, I talked earlier about the need to assess your government operations and your community needs. This funding is meant to aid not only just in your response to the pandemic, but frankly, in the overall economic recovery that frankly the pandemic has made it that has devastated our budgets and our local economies. So bring together your staff, your agency directors, your community stakeholders who have really been meeting the needs of your communities to do a needs assessment. Talk about what the needs are of your businesses, what the needs are of your schools, so on and so forth. So you can come up with a comprehensive plan and really be transparent about it, because everybody will know exactly how much is coming to you. the estimates that we provided on our website is what congressional staff created, but that's based on census data. The Department of Treasury will release the final allocation, and they will do that in consultation with state and other governmental entities. And we hope that that information is like as clean and up to date as possible. I know that there were some missing cities, and we flagged that for Treasury. If you think if your city is missing and you don't see it on there, please communicate that to Eric and Megan, and they'll get it to us. But really prioritize your own fiscal stability of your municipal government. If you drew down on your reserves, if you borrowed, focus on getting your own municipal employees back to work, but also focus on the overall fiscal health and stability of your community and putting people back to work. And so when it says safe pet projects for earmarks, meaning, make sure that how you're using this money is really going to generate an economic return on investment, because of what the pandemic has impacted your community and how. And be sure that you are maintaining your records and you are documenting your success, and really create the infrastructure, set up a dedicated fund or bank account for this information, so you can track every penny and be able to articulate on any given day how you spent this money, how it's been in line with guidance Treasury, and be public and transparent about that. I think it'll go a long way to communicating what your leadership has been during a difficult time, and tell that story not just to your residents, but through your media outlets, but also for me, because this is the first time that municipalities of all sizes will receive funding directly, it really is going to make a strong case for us to receive infrastructure dollars directly. And so if we not only do this right, because I know that we will, but if we tell a strong story on how we put this money to work to rebuild our communities economically, then we will make a strong case for direct appropriations for infrastructure, because I guarantee you there are, unfortunately, congressional leaders that are waiting to make an issue of how we expend these funds, but we need to own that narrative. And that's what I encourage you all to do, and think through how you do it with your communications, your community outreach team, and all of the people that work with you on a day in, day out basis. Next slide for me. And I think the next couple of slides are where we get into all of the money that will come in here. Just quickly, and you all know about the direct stimulus payments that are going to individuals, tax credits that are going, cities, US city leaders play a big role in educating your community on how they should take advantage of these child tax credits and stimulus dollars, helping, if people haven't received their stimulus dollars, helping them figure out how to do so. Just know that you have a role to play in that you want to make sure your residents participate in. Moving forward to the next slide. You take all of this into account. So when I talk about the buckets of funding, here we go. This is funding that will go to your state or another state education agency or local education agency. No, and I know the league is going to be on top of and working with the governor's office and the state legislature on how they're going to get these dollars out. Some of this money is already flowing. There is funding not only for emergency rent relief, there is funding for emergency utility assistance. There is additional funding specifically for rural housing needs. There's a homeowner assistance fund, so it goes directly to those people who have mortgage payments, property taxes, utilities. It's a significant amount of money. One of the important things of note here for you, and this was one of the concerns that came up, is that if a landlord didn't access the rental housing programs, then essentially those renters still feared being evicted. At this point, Treasury, and it's the Department of Treasury that's actually releasing these funds. And if you look on their site right now, they've updated their guidance to make it clear that renters can actually access this funding. And they can access this funding to be able to pay what they owe in back rent. There's funding for homeless intervention, utility assistance. I know some of you may own your utilities, some of you may not. All of that, just know that there's dedicated funding in here, but also that's an allowable use of your funds. And then nutrition programs, and then youth and education programs, childcare, Head Start, funding K through 12 and higher education. The funding for schools will go through, I mentioned your state education agency and your local education agency. That funding is meant to get children back in school learning in person. And so you can use that funding to improve ventilation systems and essentially equip the schools to create safe learning and working environments for both teachers and students moving forward. And so those are all of the funds that you can leverage to stabilize households. These are the funds that you can use to stabilize your main streets, your business improvement districts, or your business districts. I know someone asked the question about what funding is available. There's a food and service restaurants, theaters, paycheck protection, funding for the SBA, transportation that will go to transit agencies, airports specifically, but there's also funding for economic development assistance that will go to economic development authorities. Right now, we're talking to EDA about where those communities who were hardest hit can be able to access those funds. Next slide. And then just last, a lot of funding for disaster relief, public health. The key point here is to know that there is an incredible amount of money coming into your community for testing, contact tracing, mitigation, vaccine distribution. I know many communities were setting up their own vaccine testing sites. Now there are federal centers to help this. Utilize that funding, work with your county health systems, your public health systems to make sure you get those dollars to where they go, but also you make sure that those communities where you see a far less or lower vaccination rate or higher COVID case rate, that you really can work with those individual entities to target outreach where it needs to go. Also, there's significant funding for behavioral mental health services, substance abuse, suicide prevention. All of that is what I call wraparound services that people have needed as a result of the pandemic. FEMA, this is definitely also very much a bright spot. Know that FEMA is now, and it goes back to the CARES Act, it's 100% match rate. So in other words, you can use CARES Act dollars, you can use your own emergency assistance dollars to match the FEMA requirements. And so this will help those hardest hit communities. It also provides funeral assistance. I think it's about $8,000 up to each individual for funeral assistance. So this is what I talk about when there's lots of other money that's coming into your community. This is what we want to make sure you know that you leverage and you're informed about. Next slide, Megan. And then I'll stop here, but just know that we've been doing consultations with the Department of Treasury, kind of breaking it down to the ridiculous with them to say, you know, we need you to be very clear and succinct in the most simplified way possible. How can City X receive this funding? What do they need to do to report this funding, and what do they need to do to track it in very plain layman's terms, knowing that particularly small communities have a part-time mayor and maybe a town clerk. And so we are really pushing them to deliver guidance in a way that is useful regardless of city size. If you put your phone up to that QR code, it'll take you directly to all of the National League of Cities sites. We have our own national calls that we do and webinars. That's how you can stay in touch. But I know Eric and his team stay on top of what we put out, and we're churning out content every day almost. But ultimately, and if you go to the next slide, and I'm just going to tell you that our advocacy overall is strengthened when we increase the number of cities that are active members of NLC, the National League of Cities. And so I want to encourage all of you all to reach out to your staff person here. We'll send the league follow-up information to share with you all. We are creating content that is meant to help guide how you use this funding. But there are only so many hours in a day, and there's only so many of us. There's 19,000 towns and villages. And so for us, we want to prioritize communications with members. It's not that we don't love our non-members, but it's just, we just have to prioritize who we call back and frankly, who we bring in to make a strong case to Congress. And so we welcome your participation and you joining the National League of Cities as a member, but just know we're here to support and we'll continue our partnership with the league. So I'll stop there now and answer some questions. How do you want to handle the questions, Eric?
Let's see here. Let's see, we'll come back to the slides in just a couple minutes, but let's go to some. I will hand a couple over to you, Irma. And some I may have a little bit information and can provide a little bit more color to. We have one city, and they were told this did not qualify under CARES guidance. They have a land bank which had losses occur due to some sales falling through due to COVID, and they are wondering then if their funding that will come from ARPA will be able to be used to backfill those losses due to sales that couldn't occur due to COVID.
Yes, and that is similar. I know there are cities who have essentially they've had 3 years worth of concerts or big events that have canceled, and so we have made the case for, and when I say we've made the case, we'll wait to hear a final response, but we've made a strong case on why that would be considered a loss of revenue, and they can replenish essentially through this funding that's coming to them, the money that is not going to come because of the pandemic. So I feel like that would be the same thing there.
Okay, and it is still a kind of hold tight for guidance. Let's see here. The early question we got, Irma, was a little, the one that you kind of saw out of the corner of your eye regarding EMS. The situation, I believe, and we can get more clarification from them, they had a volunteer EMS service. Many employers stopped allowing their employees to provide such service, so they've had to go to a contracted service in order to keep that up. It seems pretty clearly COVID related, but
yep. Yes, most definitely. So emergency personnel, I've actually heard a number of cities who had volunteer fire departments where the volunteers just no longer showed up, and so they had to contract because they still had to provide those services. So yes, I truly believe that will easily be allowed as an expense. And I think what's most important for you all to keep in mind is as you're making decisions, so when I say track every penny, how you expend it, like what's your justification for making that expense? And you can tie it back to the guidance, or you can tie it back to what your budget was before, or what the state of affairs was with that entity pre-pandemic, and then compare it to what happened with the pandemic. And I think as long as you can make that reasoned argument to a potential auditor or Office of Inspector General, you'll be clear. Like you have the documentation on why that was an allowable use. It's when you have to start stretching those allowable uses that you get into trouble.
Yeah, some of it is simply passing the smell test. Can a city use, and this probably goes beyond just the question of broadband, but can cities use ARPA money as matching funds for federal grants such as broadband? And I would think it's probably a similar question with Cdbg and some of the HUD programs that are coming forward. Is that going to be a Treasury guidance question to be answered?
That is because we're talking about other federal program funding. And I don't know what the limitations on that program funding's end. So in other words, FEMA is one of those programs where you do have to provide matching funds. In this case, they said, no, it's okay to use ARPA and CARES Act money to provide those matching funds. I'm not sure what those other programs are going to require as matching funds or local investment. So that's one of the things we'll wait and see.
Okay, here's one that I think I know the answer to, but let's use the expert. If your city did not have an overall revenue loss, but experienced revenue losses in some areas due to the pandemic, such as Parks and Rec going down or auditorium rentals, can we use the funds to make up for revenue shortfall in those specific areas?
Absolutely. And I think that's, again, you show what you collected for park and rec fees before the pandemic hit, and you compare it with the pandemic year and what that loss was. And then you're clear about how much you're dedicating to offset those losses. Yep, pools didn't open, summer camps didn't happen. Or frankly, it went the other way. You had to provide more summer meals yourself in order to compensate for what kids weren't getting other places. So you can use that funding for that as well.
There we go. And this is funny because the exact words in the law say water, sewer, or broadband. Can dollars be used for stormwater infrastructure?
That's one of the our favorite questions to ask that we've asked multiple times, multiple different ways. So we can give very clear guidance on that.
Yeah, I've seen that in just about every set of questions anybody has submitted to Treasury.
That and sidewalks. Those are the two favorite questions. Can I do curbs and sidewalks?
Yep. Very, very frequent. Okay, let's see here. Okay, one I answered. This one I think is a challenging one. Can we use this for our electric utility? And the reasoning behind the question is not just loss of revenue, but what about upgrades impacted by lost dollars because business is closed and we were planning system upgrades, but the budget didn't work out as planned.
Yeah, again, I think without getting into the specifics, again, I think if you can make the case on how there was a loss of revenue, regardless of the source, then you should be able to offset those losses to continue to operate as you would have typically were it not for the pandemic.
Yep.
I'm not trying to be cute, but I do want to just be very clear that that as long as you can make the case that those revenues weren't there to support that expense, that should be an allowable use. But we'll know Treasury. And Eric, I want to say, I think Treasury is actually going to release guidance prior to May 10th. So as soon as we get it, we will send it to you all and then to share with all of your members. And then we'll be working to do quick analysis summaries as soon as we can.
Yep. One of these questions certainly I can answer myself basically by saying wait for guidance, but how do we determine, and I know this question has been asked by everybody, how do we determine essential workers or essential work for wages?
Yeah, I definitely think that's one of those that we'll seek guidance on. As we viewed essential workers and as we talked about essential workers with the congressional staff when they were drafting it, it was anybody that had to show up for work to be able to provide critical services during the pandemic.
Gotcha. And I guess my 2 cents on that one is, and Irma kind of talked about it a lot, and we've tried to stress it, taking the long-term view, thinking about maybe not just the city, but your community. What is going to be best for your community? And is it backfilling pool fees from last year? Maybe it is, but have that broad conversation, because this is going to be a very transparent process. There are going to be reporting requirements, and I fully expect folks to do some pretty good stories and journalistic dives, some journalistic dives and some hit pieces as to what you do. So for instance, the premium pay allows up to $13 an hour in premium pay. There may be situations where you do want to do some premium pay for some situations. I would say in the vast majority of our communities, $13 an hour is a wage that many of your residents actually make. So to have somebody who's maybe making $20+ an hour that you then add up to $13 an hour onto their wages on, you will be, rightfully asked questions about, was that the highest and best use for your community? Again, maybe it is, but you definitely want to look at that.
That's
Okay.
great advice, Eric. It's one of the questions we're getting from community partners and stakeholders. What are the requirements for cities on spending this from a public input process? There is no outline delineation of what that public input is. But me, if I was your chief advisor, your chief of staff, I would say set up public meetings, get public comment on what the real need is, so that you can go through that process and really make an informed decision. And by informed, meaning what are the highest use of these dollars? Because while it may be a significant amount, it's not going to be there forever, and you have this one shot to really help people and businesses.
Yeah. One of my closing slides that I had in our upcoming Kansas Government Journal, we're reprinting an article I came across from Mark Funkhauser's, former mayor of Kansas City, and it is going to be titled "How Not to Screw Up Your Government Stimulus Windfall," and he gets into things of recognizing these are one-time monies. If you're going to do some things, maybe you do some of those things that are the non-sexy things that need to be done. Where does your cybersecurity stand? Where we've had recent instances in Kansas with water utilities being hacked. It's not sexy. It's not something that a governing body is going to tout as a campaign issue. Hey, we funded some of our cybersecurity protections, but everybody will remember it if you are discovered to have ransomware on your systems and locked down. So those are some things to keep in mind. Let's see here. Just as I look at a final question or two, I'd say we're going to look to do future webinars, and we'll probably do one with the Office of Recovery. They're very interested in kind of making everybody aware of statewide programs that are having funding that could be used. We had a very good call with the Regional Office of Housing and Urban Development 2 weeks ago. They have a lot of funding that's coming through, and they said they would be happy to sit down with us The Office of Broadband in Kansas is another place where they are happy to visit with us. And that's a place where, quite honestly, the money that your city's getting is not going to be enough to really do anything with respect to broadband. So it's a place where you would need to find funding from the state and maybe partner with your county and other cities in your county to try and create some synergy and enough needed funding to move forward. We may have some of the cable and fiber providers come on as well to give you a sense of what it costs and what might be those incremental things you could do to get your city ready to go. Two final ones, Irma, and I'll let you go. And if we get other questions, we'll forward them along. One, we renovated our community building in 2019. Hadn't had a full year of it under operations to gauge revenues. Came nowhere close to hitting what we had anticipated and estimated, but we can't show a year-over-year revenue loss. Can we fill that revenue line based on what we budgeted?
That actually is one of the questions we asked. I think it's going to be harder because the building didn't exist before. You're not alone. There were a lot of community centers or senior centers that went up that they weren't able to utilize, so they have no basis to know what the revenues it would have brought in. So we've asked about that, so hopefully we'll get that. And also I found out today that Treasury has set up an email, or they're prepared to take questions that are still outstanding once guidance is released. So just know that if you don't get immediate answers, it's okay. This is a process. Treasury themselves, they're learning a lot about municipal governments, the different infrastructure and capacity. And so we are doing our best to provide guidance, including having local leaders for different metropolitan communities and municipalities talk directly with them and answer their questions. So it is a work in progress, and we'll get there. We'll get there, and you'll get the answers you need to be able to make smart decisions.
Okay, let's see. Actually, I've had 2 or 3 others coming in. So if you have a moment, we'll keep the cameras rolling. Cities did not get to utilize tax credits for COVID leave and mandatory quarantines. Can we use this money to reimburse ourselves? And I know this was one of those issues where with cities not getting any direct CARES funding and having to rely on their relationships and the good graces of their counties, there were several that did not get reimbursed for those mandatory sick leave and quarantine allowances. So it would seem that under the early section,
the intent of the law was pretty clear about that. So I think that would be a definite yes.
Yep. I thought I had multiples, but I have one more question. Are the losses of revenue comparisons only for 2019 versus 2020, or can 2021 revenues also be compared to 2019?
So we've asked that they not put a fiscal year on it because there are some cities that were in FY 2021 during the 2020 calendar year. And so just for simplicity's sake, to have the city delineate what was that full year pre-pandemic and be clear about what the year is they're comparing it to. And so know that this funding is through 2024. Keep that in mind. So you will be able to compare it over 2 years. So fiscal year 2021, 2022, or 2022, 2023. And I think that's important because you have property taxes that are going to be 18 months delayed, and so you need that expansive time to be able to really truly assess what your losses are and how you can remedy those losses. So that's going to be on you to delineate what those fiscal years are.
Yep. Question, was this a best practice suggestion from you? I don't believe it's a requirement. But did I understand correctly that we need to have a separate bank account solely for these funds?
That was a best practice. That was a way to account for every penny spent in a clean way, so that you can be very clear about what money is being spent and who's it going to. So that's just a recommendation. Of course, you all have multiple budgets, and you manage your budgets and accounts, for capital expenditures, for general operating expenditures, and so on and so forth. So do what makes the most sense for you. Just set up a system that will allow you to easily track funding, and not just you, but your predecessor or a city manager, or someone just coming in to audit. It should be self-explanatory.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I'm right there with Irma. It may not be required, but it would be a simple gateway, uh, and just simplify things for you. This one, I say last question, and then somebody may type while I'm asking. Can we find out if these funds can be used as matching funds for Cdbg applications for water sewer projects? That's certainly between guidance, and I can shoot a note over to
Thank you.
Department of Commerce as well, for Kansas Commerce. Can they be used for preliminary engineering reports? That will be something to share. I'll check with them as well. That would bump me to truly the final thing I'm going to say is, anytime there are billions of dollars out there, and when there are millions of dollars or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, folks can smell it in the air. And I believe you will be getting hit up from all angles, from everybody across the spectrum, to spend your money just as quickly as you can. You will probably hear, I would not be surprised if there will be people telling you that you have to use this money by the end of the year or you'll lose it. Either because they're confused and thinking of the CARES Act, or because they're trying to pry the money out of your hands. I've heard from one of my colleagues in another state that his cities are just being inundated from any firm who has dealt with him in the past decade on any project that they didn't move forward on. Hey, heard you got some money lying around now. Don't you want to do that XYZ project that you thought about? Some of those may really make sense. But again, just cautious, to Irma's point, engagement. This truly is, I hope a once in a lifetime event for us. And she also made a really good point that I'll amplify. So now I'm saying like 6 other things, but I'm going to amplify what Irma said. This is one of the few times that cities have directly received money. And it's kind of like when you start having your kids make their decisions with their money. And if they make good decisions or can explain their reasoning and rationale, then that continues. If they bring a puppy home that they bought for $5, you might think, yeah, it's probably better that we control the purse. And so infrastructure and transportation are great examples where historically that money has come to the state, with the state then deciding for you, here are the narrow parameters where you can use those monies. So this is a chance to prove that we cities can look at funding, reason through what is best for the community, keep track of those funds, and kind of shine. So
Yep.
go
And
forward.
I was just going to say, Eric, just one last point, because I also do want to flag this for you all. I know, and I have heard already that cities have been approached by firms who want to do your broadband build, or help you account or report this funding. That your city may want to contract those things, but I think it's important to to issue a public request for proposals and just be smart about it. There are firms and people who do not have the best intentions, and they see you and frankly just being overwhelmed in the use of these funds, and they want to make your life a lot easier, but they don't have the best of intentions. But that's why you have the League of Kansas Municipalities. That's why you have the National League of Cities, because we don't have an agenda other than to make sure that you are making smart decisions and you are telling your story in a way that definitely makes a strong case for you to receive direct appropriations in the future, because frankly, you're the ones that know what is happening on the ground and what is needed on the ground. And you can make that money work much faster than a state government entity.
Yep. Irma, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, we will get this posted. We'll have the slides posted. Start firing the questions at us. I put the links in the chat if you want those to look at allocations, but we'll get all the information out. Irma, I don't know how you're still even awake and have not slumbered for 4 months, but thank you for taking the time to virtually come to Kansas, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Yes, most definitely. Thank you all and have a wonderful week.
Okay, do the same. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.